How's it going, friends? And welcome to episode 10 of the Cynical Den Podcast. Once again, naps have failed me. Someone told me in the comments of the previous episode that I was napping wrong, which I guess means I'm doing it wrong 100% of the time, because yet again, I've had another nap and I feel like dog shit. They are totally ineffective. I don't know why people insist that napping is actually useful or that it helps. It has never helped me. Not once have I woken up from a nap and said, yeah, I'm glad I did that. Like, not once. I guess sometimes it's okay to nap to escape from the frustration that is the real world, especially in 2017. You know, everybody's got to be political. Everybody's got to talk about politics. And even when you try to read comics or play video games, something's got to make it political. There's always politics everywhere. Wouldn't it be nice if people just stopped doing that? They're not gonna. It'd just be nice. A pipe dream that I can dream about in my sleep. Mixed in between the nightmares. What a great way to start the episode. Ahead of the release of the sequel, I decided to watch John Wick the other day, and I was thoroughly impressed by it. Not only was the action fantastic, but it had a good story as well. Coming into it, I was kind of expecting a raid situation where the story in the raid was fine, but really the action was at the forefront and you just kind of ignored the story. But with this one, I found the story itself really intriguing. The way that they sort of had, and the way that they handled it was interesting because there was enough mystery surrounding the elements of that hotel, the currency, that you're kind of working it out as you watch it. Nobody overtly states how the hotel works or the way that the currency works or the way that this crime system works. It's all alluded to, which is a lot of restraint and subtlety, you know, that the kind of subtlety that you don't see in a lot of films. Of course, the action was awesome, like, no doubt. The club fight scene in that movie was amazing, and all of these little details that they put into it, like, there's a part where he's fighting this dude, he's about to pop him in the head, but then he realizes that he hasn't loaded his gun, and you just see him sort of there standing, getting ready to load, and shoots him in the head. It's that kind of attention to detail, like acknowledging that he's not counting his bullets. It kind of adds a little bit more realism to the guy, because even though he's kicking everybody's ass, even he's not keeping track of all the bullets that he's shot. I know some people have criticized the film by saying that the whole premise is flawed, the fact that he's basically killing dozens of dudes because his dog got killed, but he explained in plain English why he was doing it. I mean, anybody who says, oh, it's just a dog, like they even acknowledged it in the film. When someone said it was just a dog, they didn't understand why he was pissed off. Overall, I thought it was a really good film, and it was elevated by the fact that the action was well choreographed and well shot. And I'm a sucker for some good action, but I often find that a lot of modern action films are lacking when it comes to both action and story. When I say action films, I'm talking about pure action films, as opposed to action in science fiction films or superhero films, where this problem is far less prevalent. I'm talking about your set in the modern day fisticuff shooting and gun-driven action films. You know the kind of film that I'm talking about. But I will draw reference to films in the other genres that I listed to make some points, to kind of point out some good examples and bad examples of action in films. Personally, I'm a huge fan of 80s action movies. Die Hard is one of my favorite movies of all time. And while a lot of those films, including Die Hard, aren't incredibly well choreographed, the action is still tangible and fun to watch. Plus, you gotta remember that, like, the success of many of these 80s action films, at least in my opinion, like Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, relied more on strong protagonists than the action itself. You know, part of the reason why Terminator and Terminator 2 were so good was because the characters were rich and well developed and interesting, including both the protagonists and the villains. I mean, Kyle Reese is still one of my favorite action characters, as is Sarah Connor, and the whole path of Arnie in Terminator 2, and the way that he developed alongside John Connor, was captivating. And plus, the villains were scary as hell. Like, they were really intimidating. These are all the things that when you look outside of the action are the reason why these movies are elevated. The action itself is great, but it's the fact that they've got strong protagonists and characters in general that make these films memorable. Action on its own means basically nothing if there are no stakes and if nothing is tangible. If you watch a movie and you just see two dudes fighting each other, and like it's meant to be really intense but you don't know who they are, then it means you don't know what they're fighting for. And that's pretty key to what makes good action, knowing why these people are fighting. And you don't care about the outcome because you don't know who these people are. It's the reason why I don't understand why a lot of films open with a big fight scene with a bunch of characters that we don't know. Like, it means nothing. There's no impact from a fight like that if I'm seeing two people who I don't know anything about fighting each other. The reason why I don't like the action in Transformers movies is because I don't like the characters and I know it's fake as fuck. Like, literally, I would be a lot happier if a lot of the human characters got, like, crushed while Optimus Prime and Megatron were fighting. And then when it comes to fights that don't involve characters that we know of, it doesn't matter at all. Like, sometimes it's difficult to even tell who's fighting who. And then you got these fight scenes where you've got Decepticons that nobody's ever heard of, who aren't even given names in the film, and you're supposed to care when they get killed, or care when Autobots that don't even have names get killed. Meanwhile, many of the action scenes in Die Hard were fun as hell to watch because we were all rooting for John McClane in single one of the movies. Maybe to a lesser extent, a Good Day to Die Hard because that was a bad movie, but, you know, at least talking about the first three films, you're always rooting for the guy. You want him to succeed. And the lack of CGI, mainly due to a lack of availability, also meant a reliance on practical effects, which I'm always for. Practical effects in themselves are not necessary, in my opinion, to making a good action film. Like, while I'm a big fan of squibs, which is part of the reason why I love Tarantino films, movies like John Wick and The Raid show that CGI is fine as long as it's used sparingly and to where it doesn't disconnect from reality. Even though a lot of modern CGI is better than the stuff that we saw 10 or 15 years ago, you'll often get the impression that it's not real. And the reason why, I feel, is because when you're watching something that is using special effects that you just know isn't real, then despite how good it is, you look at it and go, yeah, but that would never happen. Nobody could do that. Like, I know that this isn't real, because there's no way that this could be done in real life. It's kind of the dichotomy of special effects. Generally, you need to use them in a situation where you can't do something in real life, but the fact that you can't do it in real life means that everybody's gonna know it's CGI. You know, you watch a movie like 2012, and even though the CGI is technically quite good, you're not watching that and genuinely thinking, yeah, it looks like those actors are really in the middle of, like, a giant earthquake. You know it's fake, because earthquakes don't look like that. A lot of CGI that's really good is the stuff that you don't notice. There are a lot of times where CGI is used that you wouldn't know it because it's used in instances where it blends well with what's going on. You can Google this. There are plenty of videos showing CGI used in instances where you wouldn't have known it. Though, once you find out, then you gotta start noticing it everywhere. But I digress. This has nothing to do with action movies. This is just a rant about CGI. However, disregarding all of that, all of what I've just said, when we're talking about the action scenes themselves, what is most important is the ability to understand what's happening on screen. And way too many modern action films fuck up in this regard. In my humble opinion, the staples of shitty action in movies is shaky cam, rapid cuts, terrible choreography, and speed ramping. Again, some of these techniques are not bad in and of themselves. The Bourne films demonstrate that shaky cam can be done very well in an intense scene. But there's a difference between using shaky cam for intensity and using shaky cam because what's happening, what you filmed was shit. A lot of these effects are done badly because they're done to mask bad choreography, or if the director is in fact so clueless that they think it's necessary to use 16 takes from all these different angles, as opposed to 3 or 4 really good takes. You're probably wondering why this is an issue. The main issue is when you're watching a scene where everything is so rapidly cut and shaky, you can't tell what's going on. I mean, aside from the fact that this kind of stuff can make you motion sick, I mean, I don't particularly enjoy Cloverfield because I can't see what's happening on screen and it's disorienting. And that's a big issue with using shaky cam and rapid cuts to mask bad choreography. It's disorienting, and I think everybody kind of knows it to some extent. When you're watching an action scene where everything is shaking and there's like 5 cuts in the span of about 2 seconds, which has happened in some films, despite how utterly ridiculous it is. When that's happening, there's pretty much no way that you can keep track of the position of the people in the scene. This is especially bad if you're shooting like a chase scene in a car and you keep doing these cuts. Especially when they're trying to mask continuity errors like to where they shot the scene in different locations and want to hide that fact. And this is something that you notice if you've got a keen eye for detail. But when they do that, you start to lose track of where the cars are, you lose track of where the enemies are, where the protagonist is, and what's actually impacting where. Like, you really, to do it best, you need to see both parties firing at each other or both parties hitting each other to know what's going on. Because when you're just cutting from one to the other, it's hard to keep track of. Particularly in like these close quarters fight scenes, when it's getting cut too rapidly, you just cannot follow it. And of course, this has been done well. The scene in Batman Begins where he first shows up as Batman is rapidly cut, but it's deliberately supposed to be disorienting. Like, you're not meant to be able to see what's happening. But as an audience member, if you're trying to watch a scene where you're supposed to see the action and you're supposed to see it, to have all these rapid cuts makes no sense. It means you can't see shit. The way the action needs to be shot is in a way that is easier for the viewer to follow. Like in Mad Max Fury Road, there were a lot of wide shots, which meant that we weren't clueless as to what was happening. It was easy to keep track of the pace of the scene. It was easy to tell where the vehicles were in relation to one another. And most importantly, we got to see all the good stuff. Because when everything's shaky and blurry, you don't get to see punches. You don't get to see blood spurts. Though often that's because they want to go for a PG-13 rating and don't want to show any blood. As opposed to good examples like Mad Max Fury Road, when you're watching something like Taken 2, you have no idea what's going on because there are so many cuts. Thankfully, a lot of superhero films avoid this issue. Like the warehouse fight in Batman v Superman is probably one of the best Batman fight scenes ever, because it's well shot and expertly choreographed. Then you have some of the fight scenes in like Spider-Man movies that look really good, and yeah, I mean, it's all CGI, but that's one of the benefits of doing something that's basically all CGI. You don't have this issue of the camera shaking all over the place. You're able to really easily keep track of those fight scenes because it's got these nice sweeping takes where the camera's following, and yeah, it's in a way that's unrealistic, but that's an instance where you can use CGI, where like Spider-Man's fighting someone and falling off a building. That's an appropriate instance to use it, and in those instances, the action is really well shot because you can keep track of everything that's happening. Despite being a TV series, Daredevil has some really outstanding fights. In particular, the one-shot fight from episode 2 was absolutely superb. It was brilliant. And the fact that it was all shot in one continuous take is a testament to the skills of the people behind that fight. Season 2 also had a similarly great fight. That one did use cuts, but it masked them in a way that was really cool. And when it came to the fights themselves, like where Daredevil was going down the hallway, smashing lights and throwing chains at people, there's no cuts. It's just a nice, clean shot where you can see everything that's happening, and it looks great. Even some comedy movies have done a better job of doing action. While it wasn't my favorite of Edgar Wright's Cornetto trilogy, The World's End was still a pretty good movie, and despite being a comedy, it had some really great action. There was one fight scene that was in, I can't remember if it was the 6th or 7th pub, where there were just a lot of nice long shots, and also, because Edgar Wright likes to get creative, even though you knew that there were cuts, there were parts where it'd sweep to one character, then sweep to the next one, and it was done in a way where it felt seamless. Examples like these prove that budget is no excuse, and I get pissed off when people say things like, well, it doesn't have a big budget. I mean, first of all, budget doesn't affect good or bad writing, and many of these action movies like The Expendables or The Mechanic just are fucking terrible in terms of their plots, and the budget is no excuse in that regard. But when it comes to the action, if it can be done in a TV show or a relatively low-budget comedy film, then $50 to $100 million film should be able to do it as well. Something that's key to nailing the intensity of a fight in the context of the story, in my opinion, is the emotional heft of the fight. That makes all the difference. One of my favorite lightsaber duels in Star Wars was the fight scene between Luke and Darth Vader on the second Death Star in Return of the Jedi. The reason why that fight is so good, in my opinion, is because there's more going on than just the fight. The fight itself is mainly about Luke coming very close to succumbing to the dark side. It's not just a fight for the sake of having a fight. It's a fight where the outcome matters, and where there's other things going on besides simply what's happening on screen. As long as a viewer can understand what's happening in an action scene, you've got the start of decent action. I mean, and that's key. Just make sure that people can tell what's actually happening. From there, it's about doing interesting things, having good choreography, making the action feel tangible, and a story that's not necessarily deep but engaging. Recent action films have given me hope. After a long period of shitty action movies with a lot of the same actors playing the same character with the same boring stories, we've seen some really good action films over the last few years. I'm hoping that this is sort of marking the resurgence of the quality action films that we saw in the 80s. That's what I'd like to see. I know they won't get nominated for any Oscars because if it got action, it ain't getting nominated, it seems. But just make some good movies for us and I'll be happy. Thankfully, this isn't really an issue that video games have. And, most video games with action have good action because it's all interactive and you don't have to worry about shaky cam. I don't remember many parts in Uncharted 4 where the camera was tucking in real tight and just shaking all over the place to make sure I can't see what's happening. I guess that's where video games have the advantage. Like, choreography isn't really a problem because it's all animation. And even the motion capture, you can just do it over and over until you get it perfect. And you can't be doing stupid shit like making it difficult to see, because when you do that, you've got a bad game. I remember it was one of the issues with that game, Kane and Lynch 2. Like to where they thought it was actually a good idea to do like shaky cam and visual artifacting in a video game. Like as though that would help at all. Obviously that game had a lot more problems outside of its camera system, but that certainly didn't help out. I mean, good idea, but not good for a video game. Admittedly, there have been some other games that have failed at making it easy to actually tell what's going on. I remember Modern Warfare 2 was particularly bad in this regard. I can imagine the conversation at Infinity Ward. Like, yeah, I mean, I think the system that we had for COD 4 is pretty good to where it's just red on the screen. I think that sells it. No, more blood, throw in more. No, more, make sure they can't see. There we go, that's what I'm talking about. But it just means that you can't see, and it's strange. If you're low on health, then that should be the moment where you should be able to see so that you can get out of trouble. Why would you make it to where you can't see in an instance where you're vulnerable? And I love Modern Warfare 2. It's like my favorite Call of Duty game, but even still, like, geez, I don't know what they were thinking there. I don't see why a health bar is too difficult. I mean, Halo has a health bar and they integrated it well. I don't see why so many people are afraid of just putting in a health bar. I mean, health bars are just smart. Like, it's good to know how much health you have, so that you can actually play in a way that works to how much health you have. Like in Ratchet & Clank 3, low health? Alright, time to run away, find some health packs. Yeah, regenerating health doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of game design. Has anybody ever noticed this? Regenerating health kind of doesn't make sense in a high-intensity action game because it makes you run away and hide behind a wall. I know that Halo wasn't like this. I mean, Halo, you kind of had to hide behind a wall, but at least it had a very clear system to show you how your health was. Whereas when you look at a lot of other games, it's so ambiguous, and once you just start getting hit, you hide behind a wall, wait, then duck out and shoot again. I think the reason why I like health packs is because they force you to fight the people that you're facing. Especially in, a game like Doom where the health system is tied to killing enemies. So when you're low on health, instead of just running away to recover that health, you have to fight these people. Well, I say people, but, demons. Like, you have to fight the demons to get your health back. Or, look for health packs in other games, as opposed to just running away. I'm rambling at this stage. Let's go on to a different topic. So, protesting. There seems to be a lot of protesting going on lately. I think every week since probably the middle of January, which is only a couple of weeks, but you get what I mean. There's been a lot of protests. Protests on the inauguration day for Donald Trump, like a black bloc march. Then you had the women's march the next day. Then you had like the protests at the airport. And this is only, looking in the last couple of weeks. There was all those protests last year as well. Oh boy, protests all the time. And you know me, I love protesting. I'm kidding, of course. I would rather drink molten lava than go to a protest, because I don't really feel like walking around and yelling about, like, what I think. I already kind of do that on the internet anyway. I'm pretty much sorted. Maybe it's because I don't care enough about a lot of things to actually go out and protest. Like, there are very few issues that I would consider worth going out into the streets, making signs and walking around about. Unless they were banning Coca-Cola, in which case that probably would be a big deal for me. But when it comes to most things, I'd rather just sit at home and play video games. That's why I put like 50 hours into Civilization 6, of which most of that was put in over the last few weeks. The main reason why I don't like protesting is because I consider protests to be thoroughly ineffective at actually doing anything other than pissing people off. Presumably the whole point of a protest is to spread awareness, which I guess is kind of an objective, showing solidarity, which means nothing, or to get people to change their minds and join your side, which is the only thing that would make sense if someone was doing a protest. You gotta get people on your side if you want to implement change. That's just how humans work. I don't see how that's gonna be ineffective in any way whatsoever if you're blocking cars, making a disturbance, breaking shit, or otherwise just fucking up people's day. Put yourself in the position of someone who has been inconvenienced by a protest. I know these protesters made me late for work and scratched up my car, but they make a compelling argument. Nobody has ever thought this way. If you're like blocking cars and just generally making it difficult for people to get on with their day, they're not going to join your side. They're absolutely not going to join your side. Nor are people going to consider your arguments if you yell at them in the streets. Protests have a habit of going violent as well. Obviously not all. I'm not even sure if I could say the majority, but it sometimes happens. And when that happens, I don't want anything to do with that. I don't want to be getting into any trouble with the police over some like social movements that isn't really that important anyway. I also don't want to get punched in the face or maced or anything like that. So I guess this is selfishness, or I wouldn't really say it's selfishness. It's more just looking out for my own personal safety. But aside from that, I don't really want to be involved in a situation where stuff's getting broken and innocent people's property is getting damaged. In a free and open political society, violence certainly isn't the answer, and you shouldn't be resorting to violence to get your point across. There's also this sort of hive mind mentality that you'll notice at a lot of protests, and I guess this is a symptom of a lot of people with the same opinions being in the same place at the same time. But you guys know me, I pretty much go out of my way to not be a sheep. Possibly to my own detriment, but I don't like the whole sheep mentality. I don't like being in a group of people like chanting together. And this is the kind of thing that you see a lot in protests where people chant. And I don't like that because I don't like being told what to say. And I don't like doing the exact same thing that other people are doing. Even as a kid, you know, I had this mentality. This is an interesting story that I think kind of relays the way that I work when it comes to groups. In primary school, they implemented this system where you had to sit down, legs crossed, and put your finger to your face, like symbolizing like, oh, I'm not talking, by putting a finger to your face. Now, I felt it was thoroughly degrading to be forced to sit down like a fucking chimp to put my finger on my face as instead of just sitting down and not talking. But this detrimented me in the end because they had an incentive system to where if you did that, sat down with your legs crossed, back up with your finger on your face, and not talking, you might get nominated to win a prize. So even though I wasn't talking, because I wasn't doing it like everybody else, I never got that reward. So if as a kid I was so against doing exactly what everybody else did to the point that I wouldn't sit down and put my finger on my face like a good little chimp, then what makes you think that I would be even remotely interested in chanting like a homogenous group, like repeatedly for hours? And I think a lot of people think like that too. Yeah, I think a lot of people see that kind of thing and think, whoa, oh boy, oh, no way, nope. Not doing that. What I'm trying to get at is that regardless of what points you're presenting, whether they be good or bad, if you're going to protest, I think a lot of people are going about it the wrong way now, where they're yelling at each other, acting like a bunch of twats, breaking shit, disturbing traffic, shutting down airports, and beating people up. Regardless of whatever the political leaning is, because I'm not going to talk about whether or not they're right or wrong or anything like that, but it's so ineffective. It's such a bad way of going about it that I don't get why you would do it. And I don't understand how you don't understand why people don't like you. Politically active people, especially protesters, are generally not the most popular people around. I'm just putting it out there. Personally, I would rather play video games and watch movies and TV shows, or otherwise do anything else. But to each their own, I guess. Have a fun time wasting every weekend protesting in a fruitless endeavor. Time for the Q&A section. Remember, if you have a question that you want me to answer, feel free to leave it in the comment section of this video and I'll get around to it in the next episode. I think today's question is the first time that I've answered the same person twice, but this question is from Astral Assassin, who asks, in a video game, how does one know what good content is? For example, missions or quests. For me, good content in a game is both deep and diverse. Sheer amount of content in and of itself doesn't mean much if the mission or quests are boring, unimaginative, or poorly designed. This is part of the reason why I have a lot of difficulty getting into MMOs, because a lot of them are just variants of get this item or kill this many enemies. It's not really very creative. When it comes to RPGs, I think what's important to making the content good is having it not be the same thing over and over again, and to avoid the trends of RPGs of old that had a habit of degenerating into loot this or kill this many enemies. Speaking of loot, the mere act of getting loot, in my opinion, is not really worth it as in terms of like an objective. I never really got into Borderlands, and it was because I didn't really care about getting loot, and that seemed to be the main thing that you were meant to do in the game. Kill enemies to get loot to kill more enemies. It's not really that interesting to me. Variety is the key word. It's part of the reason why so many shooter campaigns up until this year were so bad. Any variety was so thinly veiled and effortless, or otherwise incredibly linear, that it basically you'd have more fun just shooting things. And centering the screen on the thing you want dead is fun, but it's not fun when it's like the only thing that you do and when all of the enemies are effectively the same. The reason why games like Wolfenstein: The New Order and Doom worked well was because of the variety of weapons, level design, and enemies that you faced meant each encounter became progressively more interesting. There's a different tactic that you have to employ when you're fighting the bigger monsters in Doom, as opposed to in Call of Duty campaigns, where everybody is basically just foot soldier, firing the same weapons while you're also firing basically variants of a gun that shoots a lot of bullets in rapid succession. Whereas when you look at the more interesting shooter campaigns, they have a variety of weapons that are uniquely different. Getting back to RPGs, I think Mankind Divided is a good example of good content in a game. The reason why I enjoyed it, much like its predecessors, was because every mission could be tackled in a number of ways, ranging from diplomacy to multiple entrances and tunnels and backdoors, or hacking, and that's just scratching the surface. I'm talking about the side missions too. Like, each side mission was incredibly deep, and often the stories were very interesting, and it kind of developed in a way where you notice something, and then it develops into this really fleshed out conflict or dilemma, and it just continues to progress, and it hooks you to where you talk to a person, you find out some information, and you want to go out and do more. And it gives the game a lot of replay value because you can go back and try doing it different ways to see how the outcome would be. Pacing is a pretty important aspect to the quality of game content in a single-player game. Uncharted 2 remains the most well-paced game in the series, which is why it's still my personal favorite. Uncharted 3 had too much action. That was a big issue with that game. There felt like there was very little, like, moments to catch your breath and kind of calm down. Whereas in Uncharted 2, there were a lot of really good sections, like shortly after that intense train sequence, you have a couple of missions where you're pretty much walking around and doing some light platforming before you get into the third act. Uncharted 4 was on the opposite end of the spectrum, with way too many slow walking sections and not nearly enough action. I specifically remember when I was playing Uncharted 4 that I noticed that the first main action sequence in that game came at about I think it was mission 6, I think, which was the mission where you escaped from the prison while you were playing as Sam. Cause I distinctly remember, like, I was like, this is like the first proper, like, Uncharted gameplay section. And this was well into the game. Of course, the story was good as a result, but the story in Uncharted 2 was also pretty good. And I don't think that it's worthwhile detrimenting the pacing of a game for the sake of the story. Ultimately, if you're not getting bored with what you're playing, then the game is doing something well. I beat Titanfall 2 in one sitting, and while it was short, the fact that I didn't stop playing until I finished it should be a good indicator of the quality of that game. That does it for this episode of the Cynical Den Podcast. Thanks again for watching. Remember, if you liked what you saw here, feel free to subscribe to the channel and check out the other content produced by Crude Penguin on crudepenguin.com and Twitter and Facebook. All the links are available in the description. I actually haven't made the comic for this Sunday yet. I don't even have any ideas. I'm cutting things too fine lately. In fact, this podcast is getting recorded much later than it should be. You can blame naps for this. This is going to be a running joke from now on. Naps, fuck them. They suck. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next episode of the Cynical Den Podcast.